In February 1945, the first American amphibious assault on Japanese territory began. 120,000 U.S. Marines were set to face one of the most advanced defense systems in the world. In this hellish battle, a Japanese commander would strike fear into all of America, and the sight of the American flag being raised atop Mount Suribachi would become an enduring symbol. Welcome back to the Armex. Now let's explore one of the fiercest battles of the Pacific War, the Battle of Iwo Jima in early 1945. After smashing the outer Japanese defensive networks in the Pacific at places like the Green Islands and the Marshalls, the U.S. Armed Forces, having captured the Marianas, including Saipan, Tinian, and Guam in mid-1944, were now within striking distance of Japan itself. From bases in Taiwan, the Philippines, and the Carolines, American bombers could already range much of the southern Japanese Empire. The Japanese Navy had been virtually shattered at Leyte Gulf in late 1944, crippling Japan's surface fleet. American planners in Washington initially expected to invade Formosa, Taiwan, next, but then changed course. They decided to skip Taiwan and attack directly at Japan's home islands, beginning with the island of Iwo Jima. To the Japanese High Command, Iwo Jima, the Sulphur Island, known in Japanese as Ioto, was of paramount importance, even more valuable than any island the Americans had taken so far, because it was part of Japan's territory. Iwo Jima is a small volcanic island in the Pacific, roughly halfway between Guam and the Japanese home islands, about 12,200 kilometers south of Tokyo. In World War II, it served as a crucial strategic base. It had two airfields that Japan used for fighter planes to intercept American bombers heading toward Japan. And it became a forward naval outpost for the Imperial Japanese Navy. If the Americans seized Iwo Jima, they would eliminate those Japanese airfields and gain a forward airstrip from which to strike directly at Japan. Beginning in 1940, the Japanese had fortified the island. Construction teams from Japan built 2 runways at the foot of Mount Suribachi, the volcanic cone at the island's south end. By spring 1941, a Japanese Navy lieutenant and about 93 sailors arrived to begin building artillery emplacements and fortifications, and 2,000 civilian laborers came to help. Japan turned Iwo Jima into a fortress, an airbase for its fighters, and a naval port. The Americans realized that capturing Iwo Jima would solve many problems. They could use it as a stepping stone for air raids on Japan and for a future invasion of the home islands. Throughout 1944, the Japanese poured reinforcements into Iwo Jima. In June 1944, Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi was sent from Tokyo to Iwo Jima and was named commander of all Japanese forces on the island. He had up to 21,000 men under his command, about 14,000 Army infantry and 7,000 naval troops. Uniquely among Japanese officers, Kuribayashi had trained in the United States as an exchange officer before the war, and he brought fresh ideas to the island's defense. General Kuribayashi immediately began transforming Iwo Jima into a massive all-around defense complex. He ordered the construction of intricate tunnels and caves, camouflaged bunkers, and interlocking fields of fire, taking full advantage of the island's rugged terrain. No longer would Japanese troops make suicidal banzai charges as it happened at other battles. Instead, each soldier was instructed to live, move carefully, and inflict maximum casualties on the enemy. Kuribayashi himself walked the entire island every morning, supervising the work in person. The main Japanese defenses were concentrated in the north of the island, connected by a web of tunnels. In the far north, Kuribayashi's personal command post was built 20 meters underground, hidden in the mountains with a 200-meter tunnel leading to it. A radio station and weather post were built on Hill 382 in the northeast, and a gigantic command bunker was built under a rocky outcrop in the southeast for Colonel Chosaku Kaido, the Japanese artillery officer in charge of the island's guns. By fall 1944, the entire Japanese garrison was mainly underground. There were two main tunnel layers, one about 10 to 15 meters below the surface, another deeper still, all connected by lateral passages. In all, the Japanese dug about 1,500 caves and pits. Many were equipped with electricity and ventilation. Multiple exits allowed troops to slip out or move around when their positions were under attack. Besides defensive positions, the underground complex included barracks, supply depots, central command rooms, and even an operating theater for medical treatment.
Kuribayashi issued a stirring oath to his men. He told them that they would devote their lives to the defense of Iwo Jima and the glory of the emperor. "We will sacrifice ourselves for Iwo Jima and the honor of the emperor," he said. "We will ram our grenades and torpedoes into American tanks. We will infiltrate their lines and kill the enemy wherever we can. Each bullet must be aimed to kill. Every soldier must kill at least 10 Americans before falling. When the horde of enemies overwhelms us, we will fight to the last man, using guerrilla tactics." He forbade any pointless attacks. Only accurate, lethal fire was allowed. In other words, instead of futile charges, the defenders would fight from cover as long as possible.
Additional Japanese defenses were prepared. Anti-tank guns, anti-aircraft batteries, minefields, and flamethrowers. Air-based defense units were also assigned. Even some suicide Kamikaze planes were stationed nearby in case they could be used. Interestingly, no Japanese battleships or cruisers were sent to confront the U.S. fleet. The Navy ships remained far away. By early 1945, Iwo Jima was one of the most heavily defended islands in the Pacific. On the American side, news of the Leyte Gulf disaster and the loss of the Philippines had shaken Japan's leaders, and it was understood that the U.S. would soon aim for Iwo Jima. Indeed, by mid-February, U.S. intelligence noticed a suspicious change in Japanese radio codes and increased surveillance. On February 13, a Japanese reconnaissance plane spotted 170 U.S. warships heading northwest from Saipan. Instantly, all of Japan's garrison troops in the Bonin Islands, Ogasawara chain, were put on alert and moved into combat positions on Iwo Jima. Everything was now in place.
The Americans appointed Admiral Raymond A. Spruance, hero of Midway, as the overall commander of the operation. Under his command was a massive invasion force, 3 Marine divisions, 3rd, 4th, and 5th divisions, supported by a U.S. Navy armada of nearly 700 ships, including 28 aircraft carriers and thousands of airplanes. In all, about 120,000 American service members were involved. February 19, 1945, Invasion Day. Just before 2 a.m., the guns of the battleships USS North Carolina, USS Washington, and USS West Virginia thundered to life, opening fire on Iwo Jima. This marked the beginning of the invasion. From the first moments of dawn, a tremendous naval artillery barrage was underway. At 6:40 a.m., all available battleships, cruisers, and destroyers in the fleet began pounding the Japanese defenses on the island from their ships offshore. 10 minutes later, destroyers equipped with rocket projectiles began shelling Mount Suribachi and the Motoyama Plateau to the north.
About mid-morning, around 8:39 a.m., over 100 B-29 Super Fortress bombers swooped in and dropped their bombs on Iwo Jima. The idea was to soften up the island as much as possible. At 8:57 a.m., the American Navy ceased its preliminary shelling, signaling that the Marines would attempt the landing. The amphibious tractors, LVTs, some armed with 75mm howitzers, started to move toward the shore.
By about 9:02 a.m., the first wave of 69 LVTs carrying Marines reached the beaches of Iwo Jima. To the American surprise, they encountered almost no resistance at first. They believed their naval bombardment and air attacks had largely destroyed the defenders. Carefully, the Marines scrambled ashore and began moving up the beach. What the Americans did not know was that this eerie quiet was exactly what General Kuribayashi had planned. Nearly all the Japanese soldiers were hiding in their deep bunkers and cave networks, lying in wait. Under cover of darkness and silence, these troops had prepared to deliver a deadly trap. In their command posts, they quietly recited Kuribayashi's pledge, We give our lives for the defense of Iwo Jima and the glory of the Emperor, and so on, steeling themselves for the battle. At 10 a.m., the trap sprang. Suddenly, from all sides of the island, more than 400 Japanese artillery and mortar pieces opened fire on the Marines on the beach. Machine guns atop the bluffs cut loose, and sniper fire raked the open ground. Dozens of Marines were cut down in an instant as they slogged through deep sand and volcanic ash. Many of the amphibious vehicles were hit, some caught fire or overturned, and minefields sown on the beach exploded under their treads. The Americans were caught in a crossfire from hidden guns. It became horrifyingly clear most of the Japanese defenses had survived the preliminary shelling. Japanese troops simply moved through the tunnels from one firing position to another. In places where Americans thought they had cleared a bunker, Japanese soldiers would reappear through another tunnel entrance to fire again. Every time an LVT or tank approached, it was met with deadly anti-tank gunfire or hidden charges. The Marines were forced to take cover under constant artillery and small arms fire. The first hours of landing turned into a nightmare. By the afternoon of February 19th, the Marines had struggled only a few hundred meters inland at most, despite having thousands of men ashore. The U.S. fleet continued to shell any known target, but the Japanese kept their main guns well camouflaged. Day one proved extremely costly. By nightfall, more than 30,000 American troops had reached the beach, but the casualties were heavy. American figures for the first day of battle were about 1,755 casualties, around 566 killed, and the rest wounded. The beachhead looked like a scene from hell. Debris, destroyed vehicles, and the wounded littered the sand. American troops dug in and prepared for more fighting, waiting for the expected Japanese counterattack.
As evening came, the Japanese did not launch a mass counterattack. Kuribayashi judged that a night attack would be suicidal and instead conserved his forces for the morning. But the Japanese defenders did continue to fire. Throughout the night, Japanese artillery and mortars sporadically shelled the beachhead, causing more American casualties. American lookouts found it hard to correct fire. Around 3 a.m. on Feb 20, their communications went dark, possibly due to jamming or counter-battery fire, reducing the accuracy of Japanese night fire. By dawn on the next day, February 20, the Marines on the beach had survived a dreadful night, but they were shaken by the carnage of day one.
February 20th, 1945, day 2. As dawn broke, the Marines renewed their assault inland. The objectives were set. One regiment from the 5th Marine Division would attempt to take Mount Suribachi, while the other regiments would push toward the Motoyama Plateau and the airfields, Airfield number 1 and number 2, in the northern part of the island. The mountain and plateau were heavily fortified with interconnected caves and bunkers. The U.S. Navy and Marines resumed bombardment of Suribachi and Moroyama in the early morning to try to suppress Japanese fire. Then the infantry and armored units advanced. By midday, one of the 5th Division regiments, the 28th Marines, had reached the shoreline on the southwest side of Suribachi, beginning to isolate the mountain. Another regiment of the 5th Division, the 27th Marines, secured Airfield number 1, seizing the southwestern end of it by afternoon. This split the Japanese lines in the south. However, Suribachi itself remained strongly defended. Japanese troops fought fiercely from caves in the slopes. Elsewhere on the Motoyama Plateau in the center of the island, the other Marine divisions were struggling uphill. The terrain was rugged. Deep ravines and coral ridges made any advance slow. The Japanese 109th and 145th Infantry regiments were dug into this area, along with hundreds of naval gunners. The Marines had to clear hundreds of enemy caves with flamethrowers, demolition charges, and grenades.
American troops also began using armored flamethrower tanks, based on the Sherman tank, for the first time on Iwo Jima. These tanks, nicknamed Ronson or Zippo, could spray flames into enemy bunkers and caves, making them very effective at clearing the tunnels. The Marines also followed the Japanese example by placing demolition charges on themselves as suicide human torpedoes when they encountered enemy tanks.
Despite the heavy onslaught, Japanese resistance remained stubborn. By the end of February 20, after intense fighting, the Americans had gained some ground, The 5th Division had secured the southern airfield, Airfield 1, and partly contained Suribachi, but both sides paid dearly. The U.S. forces, especially the 5th and 4th Marine Divisions, suffered thousands of casualties by nightfall of Day 2, estimates of roughly 3,500. The Japanese defenders lost men as well, but most of their losses would come in the coming days. Under cover of darkness once again, the U.S. Navy sent ships to shell Mount Suribachi and dropped star shells to illuminate the battlefield, preparing for Day 3. February 21st, 1945, Day 3. The Marines pressed on. In some sectors, the U.S. advance was significant. One Marine regiment reached about 1,000 meters inland from the beach, but progress remained slow island-wide. Japanese artillery and mortars continued to rain down on the advancing Americans. By day's end, American casualties had climbed to around 5,000. Meanwhile, the Japanese launched another desperate measure: kamikaze attacks on the American fleet. On the afternoon of Feb 21, 5 Japanese suicide planes dove into the fleet. 3 of them crashed into the USS fleet carrier USS Saratoga CV-3, causing massive fires on her deck. The explosions killed 129 Americans aboard Saratoga and wounded 192 more. Saratoga's flight deck was badly damaged, and many of her planes were destroyed or thrown overboard. Later that evening, 5 more kamikazes attacked. One managed to crash onto Saratoga's deck and explode, but her crew put out the fires by about 8:15 p.m. Saratoga was forced to retire from combat and headed back to the U.S. West Coast for repairs. Also, on the evening of Feb 21, 2 lone kamikaze planes managed to evade American combat air patrol by flying just above the sea. They found and hit the escort carrier USS Bismarck C, CVE-95. One kamikaze struck near her bow and another near her stern. 4 torpedoes on the Bismarck C detonated, and within 15 minutes the ship was sinking. A total of 318 men died in the attack on Bismarck C. Hundreds more were rescued. The kamikaze raids on Feb 21 were some of the last major naval actions of the battle. With them, the Japanese effectively ran out of planes. February 22 through 23, 1945, days 4 and 5. On February 22, the Marines continued to fight their way through the island. The 4th Marine Division, which had been nearly wiped out in the first days, was withdrawn and replaced by the fresh 3rd Marine Division to reinforce the push. By this point, the 5th Division controlled the entire south end of Iwo Jima, including most of Mount Suribachi, except its summit. On February 22, the Japanese refused Colonel Senda's request to launch a full-scale counterattack, and Kuribayashi again chose to conserve his men for the next American assault. On February 23rd, with their beachhead secure, American attention turned to securing the center of the island. The 5th Marine Division units, pinned down on Mount Suribachi, finally ascended and captured the top of the volcanic cone on that afternoon. At about 10:15 a.m., after the summit was secured, U.S. Marines famously raised the American flag atop Mount Suribachi. This iconic moment, later immortalized in the famous photograph, electrified the entire fleet offshore. Ships blared their horns, and sailors and Marines cheered. For the first time during the battle, Americans felt a true turning point. February 24-25, breaking the second line. On February 24, Admiral Spruance ordered 3 Marine regiments to make a concerted push into the northern defenses. The 4th and 5th Divisions were to move up under heavy naval gunfire support, and the 3rd Division was to attack up the center toward Airfield No. 2. The most formidable Japanese positions now lay on the Motoyama Plateau and around Airfield No. 2. The terrain there was a network of deep ravines and ridges, all fortified with blockhouses and caves. The Marines advanced under intense Japanese fire. U.S. artillery and tanks, especially the new flamethrower tanks, attempted to neutralize the Japanese fortifications. Smoke and flames engulfed many Japanese gun positions as the Americans lobbed white phosphorus grenades and firebombs into holes. When tanks and artillery could not immediately break through, infantrymen would often climb in with bayonets and grenades to root out defenders. After 2 days of brutal combat, the Americans slowly cracked this second line. By the night of Feb 25, the 3rd Marine Division had captured Airfield No. 2, dealing a huge blow to the Japanese defense. They had also made a strong push toward Motoyama Village, a Japanese command and support area near the airfields. During these 2 days of Feb 24 to 25, the 3rd Division alone suffered about 2,000 casualties, and the Japanese 145th Regiment that was defending Airfield No. 2 was almost wiped out. General Kuribayashi flew to Tokyo around Feb 23 to ask for more support, but by then it was clear that Iwo Jima had been lost. By Feb 25, roughly half of the Japanese defenders were dead, and most of their heavy guns had been destroyed or captured. February 26 to 28, 1945, mopping up. On Feb 26, the U.S. Marines continued the advance against what was left of the Japanese defense. The 3rd Division pushed into the hills and ravines around Motoyama Village. The 4th and 5th Divisions cleared the southern flank and moved north. One particularly fierce battle took place at a steep ridgeline known as Hill 382 on the east side of the island, where Japanese artillery and machine guns held up the Marines. On Feb 26, the 4th Marine Regiment suffered another 792 casualties trying to take that position. All the while, American losses were mounting steadily each day.
By Feb 28, U.S. Marines had captured Motoyama Village and most of the Central Plateau. The remaining Japanese forces was squeezed into a shrinking pocket in the northern part of the island, roughly the area from Hill 382 to the northeast shore. The Americans even brought in U.S. Army Air Force support. On March 6, the 1st Army P-51 Mustang fighters landed on Iwo Jima's newly captured airfields to provide close air support and combat air patrols. March 1 to 7, 1945, the endgame. In the first week of March, the Marines continued a thorough sweep of Iwo Jima. They often fought building by building, cave by cave, eliminating each Japanese pocket. Japanese soldiers, nearly out of ammunition, food, and water, made desperate efforts to strike back. Some defenders strapped explosives to themselves, rolled under approaching tanks, and detonated, destroying a few vehicles. These were almost the last acts of resistance. On the night of March 8-9, Japanese commander Kuribayashi and Colonel Senda planned one final all-out attack. They assembled about 1,500 men, mostly Navy infantry and a few officers, to launch a suicide assault on the Marine lines at dawn. Senda told his officers solemnly, "We will meet tomorrow night at the Yasukuni Shrine," implying that they would die honorably. The plan was to strike before the American bombardment started at dawn. However, a miscommunication caused them to gather at 11 p.m. on March 8 instead of before dawn on March 9. As the Japanese massed for the attack at the Marine front lines, called Line 4, an American sentinel spotted them and raised the alarm. U.S. artillery immediately poured fire into the gathering storm of Japanese soldiers. After about an hour of shelling, the assault force was decimated. Most of the 1,500 troops were killed or scattered. This effectively ended hopes of any large Japanese counterattack.
Over the next days, the Americans hunted down the remaining pockets of resistance. On March 11th, the island was divided. Japanese in the east were isolated from those in the northwest. On March 16th, Admiral Chester Nimitz officially radioed that Iwo Jima had been conquered and that all Japanese command on the island had ceased. That night, Admiral Spruance announced to the fleet that the island was secure. On March 17th, the Japanese government announced on the radio that Iwo Jima had been lost. In reality, isolated groups of Japanese soldiers still held out in the northern caves. In the final days, thirst and starvation took a toll. On March 21, Kuribayashi's headquarters bunker was blown open by 4 tons of explosives, perhaps by a U.S. bomb. Kuribayashi survived and continued to direct what remained of the fight. On March 24, about 300 Japanese launched a last desperate assault on the Marines at the northern airfield. Marine combat engineers and infantry fought them off in brutal close-quarters combat. This final attack was finally crushed by dawn March 25. The Marines counted over 100 bodies where the Japanese had launched their assault. By March 26, Iwo Jima was officially declared secure by the U.S. command. The battle had raged for a full month, one of the bloodiest of the entire Pacific War. On March 27, 1945, General Kuribayashi was finally tracked down. He and a few officers made their last pilgrimage to the north of the island.
Legend says they turned toward Japan's imperial palace in spirit to salute the emperor. Then Kuribayashi performed the ritual of seppuku, or harakiri. He plunged a short sword into his abdomen and ended his own life. Thus ended the Battle of Iwo Jima.
Casualties and aftermath. Of the roughly 21,000 Japanese soldiers defending Iwo Jima, over 18,000 were killed in battle or committed suicide when defeat was imminent. Only 216 were taken prisoner. Most of the Japanese dead were buried in their bunkers. Many remain undiscovered in the island's tunnels even decades later. The American losses were also staggering. Out of about 70,000 Marines who fought, plus tens of thousands of sailors and support personnel, around 26,000 were casualties. Of these, 6,821 were killed and 19,000 plus wounded. The Marines suffered over 6,000 killed alone. The rest were Army and Navy, ships' crews, Marines ashore, etc. These losses shocked the American public and military leaders. The fall of Iwo Jima had significant consequences. In Japan, the government was shaken. On March 10, 1945, Japanese Prime Minister Kuniaki Koiso, already under pressure from earlier losses at Leyte Gulf, resigned partly due to the disaster of Iwo Jima. Emperor Hirohito appointed a new prime minister, sensing that the war effort was crumbling. For the Americans, Iwo Jima was a grim warning. The ferocity of the defense and the high casualties foretold what the invasion of Okinawa and a possible invasion of Japan's home islands would cost. Indeed, just weeks later, the next great battle, Okinawa, would begin, a battle even bloodier than Iwo Jima. The struggle on Iwo Jima proved that by 1945, the Japanese would fight to the last man. The iconic image of the flag on Suribachi, born from this battle, symbolized American resolve, but it came at a terrible price. In the end, the Americans gained their foothold. The newly captured airfields on Iwo Jima were soon used to station fighter planes that escorted B-29 bombers over Japan and to help rescue damaged American aircrews. But the cost was high. Iwo Jima remains a powerful reminder of the courage and sacrifice on both sides at the edge of hell.